White CEO mocked a black woman at a billionaire gala, then discovered she controlled the $6.8 billion deal. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You don't belong here. The words cut through the ballroom like a blade dragged across crystal. The music faltered mid-note. Forks froze above porcelain plates. Conversations collapsed into a stunned hush as heads turned in unison toward the source of the voice. A blonde woman in a deep red gown stood abruptly from her chair, one manicured finger extended across the table. Her posture was sharp, rehearsed, the stance of someone used to being obeyed. Diamonds caught the chandelier light at her throat, flashing like punctuation marks on every cruel syllable. Across from her sat a black woman in a sleeveless white dress. She didn't flinch. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One woman standing, loud, claiming the room through volume and accusation. The other seated, spine straight, hands resting calmly near her untouched champagne. No security detail. No visible entourage. Just composure, heavy, deliberate, unmovable. A murmur rippled through the surrounding tables. Oh my God! Did she really just say that? This is a closed event. The woman in red scoffed, her lips curling as if amused by her own authority. This table is for serious people, she continued, her voice rising just enough to make sure the cameras caught it. Billionaires. Decision makers. Not mistakes. A few nervous laughs surfaced. Not agreement, fear. The kind of laughter people offer when they don't want to be next. Phones were already lifting. Quietly. Smoothly. Like reflex. The black woman finally looked up. Not with anger. Not with embarrassment. With focus. Her eyes moved slowly from the accusing finger, to the woman's face, then outward, taking in the room. The chandeliers. The silk gowns. The men in tailored tuxedos suddenly very interested in their wine glasses. The entire spectacle of wealth pretending not to see itself. She inhaled once. The sound barely registered, but something shifted anyway. The woman in red mistook the silence for victory. She leaned forward, lowering her voice into something more intimate, more venomous. Security must have made a mistake letting you in, she said. Happens all the time when people try to blend in where they don't belong. That word again. Belong. A waiter nearby hesitated, tray trembling slightly in his hands. He glanced between the two women, unsure which hierarchy he was supposed to obey. No one intervened. No one ever did at moments like this. The black woman placed her napkin on the table with careful precision. The soft rustle of linen sounded absurdly loud in the silence. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply met the woman's gaze. There was history in that look. Not personal history, something older. Something learned. The look of someone who had been underestimated more times than she could count, and had long since stopped correcting people in advance. The woman in red frowned. Do you have something to say? She snapped. Or are you finally realizing this isn't your world? A flash of irritation crossed her face, the kind that appears when dominance isn't immediately acknowledged. Before the black woman could respond, before the room could decide which way it was about to lean, she reached into her clutch and retrieved her phone. Not hurriedly. Not defiantly. Just, naturally. The screen lit her face for a brief moment. Several guests noticed. A man at the far end of the table stiffened, recognition flickering behind his eyes before he looked away again. The woman in red laughed sharply. Calling someone, she mocked. That won't help you. The black woman's thumb moved once across the glass. That was all. The air changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But unmistakably. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to the story. The black woman looked up again, her expression unreadable. Calm. Certain. You're right, she said quietly, her voice steady enough to carry without effort. This isn't my world. A pause. The woman in red smirked, already preparing her next line. But, the black woman continued, eyes locked on hers, it is my deal. The words didn't land like an explosion. They landed like gravity. Several phones vibrated at once. A man 2 tables over glanced down at his screen and went pale. Another stood abruptly, chair scraping against marble as he stepped away to take a call. The woman in red noticed the movement, the sudden tension rippling outward, and frowned. What is this? She demanded, though for the first time, her voice lacked certainty. The black woman rose then. Slowly. Gracefully. The room seemed to make space for her without realizing it. You should sit down, she said softly. The woman in red laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. Excuse me. The black woman didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Because at that exact moment, the first notification hit. And nothing in that ballroom would ever be the same again. The silence didn't break. It thickened. What had once been the soft hum of wealth clinking glass, muted laughter, polite orchestral music now felt suspended, as if the room itself was waiting for permission to breathe again. The woman in red was the first to move. She straightened, smoothing the front of her gown as though composure could be restored by fabric alone. Her smile returned, practiced and sharp, but something beneath it had shifted. The certainty was gone. In its place, irritation edged with unease. My deal, she scoffed. You must be confused. A few guests nodded instinctively, eager for the familiar order to snap back into place. Confusion, after all, was safer than consequence. The black woman said nothing. She remained standing now, shoulders relaxed, hands loosely clasped in front of her. From this angle, it was clear how deliberately unremarkable she had dressed. No loud jewelry. No logos. Nothing that begged to be noticed. The kind of restraint that only ever came from someone who didn't need approval to exist in a room. Across the table, a man in a navy tuxedo checked his phone again. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "That can't be right." She whispered back, "But it is." The woman in red noticed them. Her gaze snapped from face to face, searching for reassurance for the old reflex of obedience. Instead, she found avoidance. People suddenly very interested in their screens. Their glasses. Anything but her. What's going on? She demanded, her voice cutting sharper than before. Still, the black woman didn't answer. She didn't need to. At the edge of the ballroom, a senior partner from one of the sponsoring firms quietly excused himself from his table. Then another. Chairs slid back, soft but unmistakable. The movement spread in ripples, subtle, controlled, but irreversible. The orchestra faltered again. The woman in red turned toward the head of the table, her confidence cracking. "This is ridiculous," she said, too loudly. "Someone explain this." A waiter passed behind her, eyes downcast, expression tight. Moments earlier, he had been unsure which woman held power. Now, the answer felt obvious. The black woman finally spoke. "I didn't come here to explain myself," she said calmly. "I came here to observe." She let the words settle. "To see how people behave," she continued, "when they think no one important is watching." A murmur spread through the room, not laughter this time, but recognition. The uncomfortable kind. The woman in red bristled. "You think this is some kind of lesson?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The black woman met her eyes, steady and unblinking. "Yes," she said. "You're someone who confuses invitation with authority." The insult landed cleanly. No venom. No raised voice. Just truth, placed carefully where it couldn't be ignored. Another phone vibrated. Then another. At the far end of the ballroom, a man rose abruptly, pressing his hand to his earpiece. "I need confirmation," he whispered urgently. "Right now." The woman in red followed his movement, panic flickering openly across her face now. "This isn't funny," she said. "If this is some stunt." "It isn't," the black woman interrupted, gently. She reached for her glass at last, lifting it with effortless grace. The chandelier light caught the rim, scattering reflections across the table. "I didn't lose anything tonight," she said. "I learned exactly what I needed to know." Her gaze swept the room once more, the guests, the sponsors, the silent witnesses who had done nothing when it mattered. "But you," she added, turning back to the woman in red, "just did." The orchestra stopped completely. And for the first time all evening, the woman in red understood what it felt like to stand in a room that no longer belonged to her. They were trying to make sense of her. That was the mistake. Around the ballroom, minds scrambled for familiar explanations, labels that made discomfort manageable. Guests leaned toward one another, voices lowered, as though secrecy could restore control. "She's someone's +1. No, maybe legal counsel. Could be a donor's wife. A quiet one." Each guest said more about them than it did about her. The black woman stood exactly where she was, unbothered by the speculation curling around her like smoke. She had seen this pattern before. When power didn't look the way people expected, they rushed to minimize it. To rename it. To make it small enough to ignore. Across the room, the woman in red paced beside her chair, agitation bleeding through every movement. She pulled her phone from her clutch, tapping sharply at the screen. "Get me Richard," she snapped into the receiver. "Now." Her voice had lost its polish. What remained was urgency, the kind that only surfaced when certainty collapsed. Nearby, a gray-haired man in a tailored tuxedo watched the exchange with growing dread. He had been in enough boardrooms to recognize the signs. Deals didn't unravel with shouting. They unraveled with silence. With messages sent quietly, deliberately, to the right people. He checked his phone again. Still no reply. The black woman turned slightly, her attention drawn not to the woman in red, but to the room itself. She studied faces with the detached focus of someone reviewing data, not judging, simply observing. Who avoided her gaze? Who held it? Who suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be? This was the part no one ever prepared for. The waiting. A woman near the center table whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything?" Her companion answered without looking up. "Because she doesn't have to." That truth settled uncomfortably. The woman in red ended her call with a sharp motion. "Voicemail," she muttered. Her confidence wavered again, this time visibly. She turned back toward the black woman, anger replacing uncertainty. "You think you can walk in here," she said, louder now, "and destabilize everything without consequences?" The black woman finally responded not to the accusation, but to the fear beneath it. "I didn't destabilize anything," she said calmly. "I revealed it." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. At the far end of the ballroom, a senior executive from one of the investment firms rose and approached quietly. He stopped a respectful distance away, his voice low. "Ma'am," he said to the black woman, "may I have a word?" She regarded him for a brief moment, then nodded. They spoke quietly. No one could hear the words, but the effect was immediate. The man's posture stiffened. He nodded once, sharply, then turned and walked away without another glance at the woman in red. That was when the room truly understood something was wrong. Phones came out openly now. No more pretense. Messages were typed, calls placed, heads bent together in urgent clusters. The gala, once a carefully curated performance of influence, began to fracture into pockets of quiet panic. The woman in red watched it all unfold, her breath shallow. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. The black woman met her gaze. "Nothing he didn't already know," she replied. "Just enough to remind him where his leverage actually sits." The woman in red laughed, but the sound cracked immediately. "You're bluffing." The black woman tilted her head slightly. "Then stop reacting." The challenge hung in the air. She didn't. Her hand trembled as she lifted her phone again. Around them, the gala continued in fragments, music long forgotten, champagne untouched, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Whatever this night had been meant to celebrate was already gone. And for the first time, the people in that room began to understand the truth they had missed from the start. They hadn't misjudged a guest. They had misjudged the center of gravity. By now, the room was no longer pretending. The illusion of control so carefully constructed with lighting, music, and etiquette had cracked, and everyone could feel it. The gala still looked the same, but it no longer functioned the same. Power had shifted, and no one had announced it. That was how real power always moved. The black woman stood quietly near the table, her presence no longer questioned, only studied. People weren't asking who invited her anymore. They were asking something far more dangerous. Who answers to her? She had been underestimated because she didn't resemble their expectations. No entourage, no theatrical confidence, no visible hunger for attention. They were used to power that demanded to be seen. She embodied the kind that didn't need witnesses. Years ago, she had learned this lesson the hard way. In rooms much smaller than this one. In offices where her credentials were reread twice. In meetings where her ideas were praised then reassigned to someone else's voice. She had learned not to fight every battle aloud. Instead, she built quietly. While others chased headlines, she acquired leverage. While they networked, she structured deals that made networks irrelevant. While they celebrated access, she became infrastructure. That was the mistake unfolding around her now. The woman in red paced again, frustration bleeding into panic. She kept glancing toward the entrance, as if someone might arrive and fix this. Restore the hierarchy. Explain the confusion away. But no one came. Across the ballroom, a man in a black tuxedo lowered his phone slowly, his face drained of color. He leaned toward his wife and whispered something that made her inhale sharply. Another guest stood and left without explanation. Then another. The black woman noticed it all, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This was the moment when systems revealed themselves, not when they were strong, but when they were threatened. She spoke again, her voice calm, measured. "You're all wondering who I am," she said, not loudly, but with enough presence that the room bent toward her words. The remaining conversations died instantly. "I don't usually attend events like this," she continued. "Not because I don't belong, but because I don't need to." Her eyes moved briefly to the woman in red, who stiffened. "I was invited tonight because a decision needed to be finalized," she said. "A decision that affects a lot of people in this room." A sharp breath was heard somewhere behind her. The woman in red laughed, brittle and desperate. "You expect us to believe you're the decision maker," she said. "On a deal of that scale?" The black woman met her gaze. "Yes." One word. No emphasis. No drama. The impact was immediate. Someone near the sponsor table whispered, 6.8. Someone else replied, "That's not possible." A third voice, quieter, said, "It is. I've seen the structure." The woman in red shook her head, backing away as if distance could undo what was happening. "This is insane," she muttered. "You're nobody." The black woman didn't react. Because she had never needed to be somebody here. She took a single step forward, her heel soft against the marble floor. "I didn't come to take anything from you tonight," she said evenly. "I came to see if you deserved what you were asking for." Her gaze hardened not with anger, but with finality. "And now," she added, "I have my answer." The chandeliers continued to glow overhead. But beneath them, the deal and the world that depended on it was already beginning to collapse. The room felt smaller now. Not because anyone had moved closer, but because there was nowhere left to look that didn't carry weight. Conversations had thinned to murmurs. Laughter had vanished entirely. What remained was the quiet awareness that something irreversible was underway. The woman in red stood frozen near her chair, the confidence that had once animated her posture now draining away in real time. She glanced again toward the entrance, then toward the sponsor table, then back at the black woman as if hoping one of those directions might offer an exit. None did. "This is absurd," she said finally, forcing the words out as if volume alone might restore control. "You can't just decide the fate of a deal because of a misunderstanding." The black woman regarded her evenly. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," she said. "It was a demonstration." A few heads lifted. Others lowered further. The black woman reached into her clutch again, not to provoke, not to threaten but to conclude. The movement was unhurried. Precise. The kind of motion that suggested a decision had already been made long before the gesture itself. She unlocked her phone. Around the ballroom, a handful of people recognized the posture immediately. They had seen it in boardrooms, in private offices, in moments that never made headlines, the moment before a signature vanished, before a funding stream went dark. The woman in red scoffed weakly. "You're doing this because I embarrassed you?" she asked, desperation edging her voice now. "Because of one comment?" The black woman didn't look at her phone. She kept her eyes on the woman instead. "I'm doing this because of what you revealed," she said. "Not about me. About you." Silence followed, heavy, unrelenting. She tapped the screen once. That was all. Across the room, a man's phone buzzed. He stiffened, then checked it again, as if hoping the message might change. It didn't. Another vibration followed. Then another. The effect rippled outward, subtle but devastating. Faces drained of color. Postures shifted. People began standing, not out of panic, but necessity, stepping aside to take calls they could no longer ignore. The orchestra packed up quietly, instruments lowered as if instinctively sensing the night was over. The woman in red watched the movement unfold, confusion giving way to alarm. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice barely holding together. The black woman slipped her phone back into her clutch. "I honored the structure," she said calmly. "The one you assumed you controlled." She turned slightly, addressing the room rather than her accuser. "The deal was never about tonight," she continued. "It was about trust. Alignment. Judgment." Her gaze returned to the woman in red. "You failed all three." A man from the sponsor table approached hesitantly, his voice low. "The withdrawal notice has gone out," he said, not meeting the woman in red's eyes. "All commitments are suspended." The words hit harder than any insult. The woman in red staggered back a step, gripping the edge of the table for balance. "You can't," she started, then stopped. Because she could. And she had. The black woman picked up her glass at last, took a small sip, then set it down untouched. "I didn't come here to ruin your evening," she said. "I came here to decide whether I would invest in your future." She paused, just long enough for the truth to settle. "I won't." She turned away then, walking calmly toward the exit as the gala dissolved behind her, a room full of people finally understanding that power had never been sitting where they thought it was. The collapse didn't announce itself with noise. It moved quietly, efficiently, the way real consequences always did. By the time the black woman reached the edge of the ballroom, the deal was no longer unraveling. It was gone. Phones lit the room like distant fires. Screens reflected off crystal and glass as messages stacked faster than anyone could answer them. Withdrawal notices. Suspended commitments. Effective immediately. The gala, once a theater of excess, had become a triage center. At the sponsor table, two senior executives argued in low, urgent tones. One had his hand pressed to his forehead, the other pacing with his phone clenched tight. "This has to be temporary," one whispered. "It isn't," the other replied. The capital stack just vanished. Across the room, the woman in red stood alone now. People had begun to give her space, not out of respect, but instinct. Power had shifted away from her, and everyone could feel the gravity change. Conversation stopped when she approached. Eyes slid past her instead of meeting her gaze. She grabbed her phone again, this time dialing without pretense. "Fix this," she hissed the moment the call connected. "I don't care how. Get her back on the line." A pause. Her face tightened. "What do you mean she's not available?" Another pause longer. Her voice dropped. "Say that again." The answer hollowed her out. She lowered the phone slowly, the color draining from her face as the truth finally landed in full. This wasn't a delay. This wasn't leverage. This was final. Nearby, a donor couple whispered frantically. "If the funding's gone, the expansion collapses. And the board vote? Doesn't matter now." The ripple spread outward, faster now. One exit. Then another. Guests leaving early, coats pulled on in silence. The gala staff watched helplessly as the room emptied, their rehearsed smiles replaced by confusion. At the doorway, the black woman paused. She didn't turn back out of spite. She turned back out of awareness. The room had changed. The people in it had changed. And they deserved to feel it. "This is what happens," she said calmly, her voice carrying just enough to reach those still listening, "when access is mistaken for ownership." Several heads lifted. Others bowed. She continued, not louder, just clearer. "You built a room where dignity was optional," she said. "Where respect depended on perception. That's not a system. That's a liability." The woman in red stared at her, eyes glassy, lips parted as if searching for words that no longer worked. "You didn't lose the deal tonight," the black woman said, meeting her gaze one last time. "You exposed why you were never meant to have it." Silence followed, deep, unprotected. Then the black woman turned and walked out. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. The city beyond the gala glowed, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside marble walls. Her car was already waiting. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed once. A single confirmation. Done. She closed her eyes briefly, not in relief, not in triumph, but in completion. Behind her, the doors closed. And inside that glittering room, the collapse finished what it had started. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. At first, it was denial, a collective hope that this was still a misunderstanding, that someone important would intervene, that money could still smooth what pride had broken. But then the confirmations came. One by one. A senior partner at the sponsor table ended his call and didn't sit back down. He simply stood there, staring at the floor as if recalculating his entire quarter. A woman near the center table whispered, "It's official," and covered her mouth too late to hide the tremor in her voice. The deal wasn't paused. It was dead. The woman in red felt it before she fully understood it. The room no longer looked at her the same way. Not with admiration. Not even with curiosity. With distance. She took a step forward, instinctively reaching for the nearest anchor, a donor she'd known for years. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away and stepped aside. That hurt more than the loss. "Wait," she said, her voice cracking through the thinning crowd. "This doesn't make sense." No one answered. Across the ballroom, someone finally said what everyone else was thinking. "Oh my God, that was her." The words spread quickly now, unchecked. "She controls the capital. She always did. They just never showed her face." The whispers carried a new tone, not shock anymore, but regret. The black woman had been invisible by choice. That truth settled heavily. The woman in red turned slowly, her gaze landing on the empty space near the exit where the black woman had stood moments earlier. Too late now. The performance was over. The audience had changed. She lowered herself into her chair, movements stiff, mechanical. The diamonds at her throat no longer caught the light the same way. They looked excessive. Out of place. Around her, the gala dissolved completely. Staff began clearing untouched plates. The orchestra quietly packed their instruments. What was meant to be a celebration ended as an evacuation. A man nearby shook his head. "She didn't raise her voice once." "No," another replied. "She didn't need to." That was the detail that lingered. No shouting. No threats. No spectacle. Just a decision. The woman in red stared down at her hands, still perfectly manicured, now trembling despite her effort to still them. She had built her authority on presence, on dominance, on being the loudest voice in the room. And she had lost to silence. Outside, headlights cut through the dark as cars departed one after another. Inside, a few guests remained, stunned by the speed of it all. "This will follow her," someone whispered. "Yes," another answered. "But not the woman you mean." Because everyone in that room understood now. The mistake wasn't mocking a stranger. The mistake was mocking someone who never needed to announce who she was because the world already moved when she decided it should. By the time the last guests drifted toward the exits, the ballroom no longer felt like a place of power. It felt like a reminder. Crystal glasses sat half full on linen tablecloths no one bothered to straighten. Programs lay abandoned, their gold-embossed titles suddenly meaningless. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, brilliant and indifferent, illuminating a room that had lost its purpose. The woman in red remained seated long after most had gone. She stared ahead, not at anything in particular, replaying the moment again and again, the finger she'd pointed, the laughter she'd invited, the silence she'd mistaken for weakness. All the signals she'd misread because she had never learned to recognize power unless it looked like her own. Around her, staff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. Not out of respect. Out of discomfort. No one wanted to be too close to the lesson. A man she once called an ally paused nearby, hesitated, then spoke without warmth. "You should probably leave," he said gently, as if speaking to someone already diminished. She looked up at him, searching for something familiar. There was nothing. Outside, the night had settled fully. Cars lined the curb, engines humming, drivers waiting with the patience of people used to carrying others away from consequences. When the woman in red finally stood, it was without drama. No one noticed. No one needed to. Across the city, messages were already moving through boardrooms and private offices. Quiet confirmations. Adjustments. Realignments. A deal worth billions didn't just vanish. It reattached itself elsewhere. In a private car gliding through the dark, the black woman sat in silence, city lights passing like distant thoughts. She didn't check her phone again. There was nothing left to confirm. The decision had been made the moment dignity was questioned. She thought briefly of the room she'd left behind, the faces frozen in realization, the sudden understanding that respect wasn't a courtesy. It was currency. And they had spent it carelessly. Tomorrow, headlines would frame the story differently. Analysts would speculate. Executives would issue statements carefully stripped of accountability. But none of that mattered. What mattered was simpler. She had entered a room where she was told she didn't belong. And she had left it exactly as it deserved to be, unchanged in appearance, but permanently altered in truth. Power, she knew, didn't need the last word. It only needed the final decision. Morning came quietly. There were no sirens, no breaking news banners flashing across screens at dawn. Just emails sent earlier than usual. Meetings moved forward. Calendars adjusted. The world absorbed the shift the way it always did, without ceremony. Inside a glass conference room several miles away, a board convened under a different agenda than the one they'd prepared for weeks. The numbers were the same. The projections unchanged. Only the outcome had moved. Across town, the woman in red woke to a silence she had never known. Her phone lay untouched beside her bed. No messages. No reassurances. No damage control waiting to be executed. The network that once responded instantly to her tone had gone quiet overnight, not out of cruelty, but instinct. Power had changed addresses. By noon, the story had taken shape in whispers rather than headlines. A deal withdrawn. A partnership reconsidered. A future redirected. Analysts spoke of strategic realignment and unforeseen variables, careful to avoid naming the moment where everything had actually turned. Because the truth was uncomfortable. It wasn't the deal that failed. It was judgment. The black woman spent the morning as she always did. No press calls. No victory lap. Just work, steady, intentional, forward-moving. The kind of work that didn't need witnesses to matter. She signed documents. Reviewed projections. Approved a different path for capital that would now flow toward people who understood what responsibility actually looked like. In another room, someone asked her assistant if she planned to make a statement. No, the assistant replied calmly. She already did. It had just been spoken without a microphone. By evening, the gala was already being reframed as a footnote, an unfortunate misunderstanding, an event that got away from its original purpose. Those who had laughed too quickly now distanced themselves with practiced concern. But some lessons couldn't be edited. They lingered. The lesson wasn't about race alone. Or wealth. Or status. It was about the cost of assuming dignity was optional. About confusing access with authority. About mistaking silence for absence. The woman who had been told she didn't belong had never needed permission to be there. She had only needed the room to reveal itself, and it had. As night fell again, the city resumed its rhythm, unaware of how little it had taken to rewrite one corner of its future. No monuments shifted. No buildings fell. Just one decision. Quiet. Precise. Final. And somewhere between marble floors and closing doors, the truth settled into place. Power doesn't demand recognition. It waits. And when it moves, it doesn't ask who belongs. It decides what remains.